friends. This is our second portrait class of the portrait session. Very excited to begin working on phase 2 of our portrait that we started last week. All right, so I'm going to begin with a different sort of approach today. We are going to get into painting skin tones today, but what I thought would be kind of a fun sidestep, like I said last week that in the beginning of these lessons, I'm going to be taking about a little bit of time here, just to have a part A of the lessons. So we may talk about eyes or ears or whatever. Today we're going to talk about mixing skin tones because that is a primary concern for a lot of people when they approach portraits. So instead of just jumping in and thinking about all these other things that we have to think about as far as edges, lighting, all these different concepts that we are often talking about in painting, I thought what would be kind of fun to do is to just take your palette okay, and tape on here a couple of different races of people, or if you're just going to focus on one race that you're doing, like if we're just going to work on Caucasian, you can just tape. These are magazine pictures I cut out. I've got a little African boy down here, an Asian lady, and then Caucasian. So what I'm going to demonstrate on my palette here is how to mix some of these skin tones just right on here. So I would encourage you to practice this on your own time. What you can do is you can just lay it right on your palette. Don't worry about painting eyes or noses or mouths or anything. Just try to get these different skin colors, and I'll show you how I'm going to do that on here so you have that and you can figure out what to do with that. All right, so let's jump in and do that. So on my palette today I have titanium white, cad yellow medium, cadmium red medium, yellow ochre, burnt sienna, ultramarine blue. I have phthalo green, I don't know that I'm going to use it, and alizarin crimson. Okay. All right, so what I want to do is start out with, we're going to start out with just a Caucasian skin tone right here, and then I'm going to work my way across the palette. So what I like to do when I begin a skin tone is I'll start out with just a basic mixture of yellow ochre and a little bit of white. And I'll paint those two colors together. Okay, like that. And then into that mixture, if the skin tends to be a little bit warmer or cooler, it depends on which shade of red I will add. So I have alizarin crimson here. I'll just put a spot of it there. And then I have cadmium red here, and I'll put a spot of it there. So into this mixture, I will make this skin tone a little bit cooler, and you can match it right next to it. If you need a little bit whiter, you can do that. You could grab some white over here as it goes over into the light area. If you need a little bit warmer, just add a touch of the yellow ochre, like that. Now, wipe your brush off if you want to try it with just a little bit of the cadmium red. Let's get some more white in there. You can see how that becomes a little bit more of this warmer rosy tone. So let's add a little more yellow ochre, and this will make it a little bit darker, a little more intense color. And you can match that to some of these darker tones in there. You can add a little bit of burnt sienna into that to give you some of those softer shadows up along the eyeshadow area up in there and down under the eye and over on the side of the cheek. Okay, so this is just a very basic skin tone. You can add more white to that to give yourself a little bit more highlight in the surface areas of the skin. Now, to create a little bit more shadow, you can add, I'll make up a mixture here of burnt sienna and a little bit of blue. So I'll paint those colors together, and this is my foundation that I will use for all the different races for my shadow. If you want a cooler, more chalky shadow, add a little more blue, and that'll make it cooler. If you want it a little bit warmer, add a little bit more yellow ochre and more sienna. Okay, so you can see how that then matches some of these very dark passages of the skin tone in here. So add a little white to that, and you can see it becomes that skin tone just about in there. We can paint right on it. These are magazine pictures. So you can see how, and what I do is when I mix up a patch of color like this, I'll use that throughout my painting. If I have this, I'll see on the portrait all the different places where that color is, and I might just put that on there while I have that on my brush. and I go around like that. Just painting it where I see it. Wipe your brush off frequently to keep it clean. Grab some of these other colors that you see, and that's one way you can just match that color right there. Okay, so a little bit of yellow ochre and alizarin. Just paint these colors together. That's too dark. You can see where else it might fork up there. Maybe over here. Okay, and then you can take a little bit of, try this, cad red with a little touch of cadmium yellow. Paint those two colors together and some white. Depending on how much of the chrome you add, these two colors, cad yellow, cad red, are very strong in their intensity. So you can mix them and make a bright, vibrant color, but then you can neutralize it and tone it down by its complement, which would be the opposite of orange is blue. So we'll grab a little bit of my blue-brown mixture here to just tone that down a little and neutralize it. Okay, so you can take away the intensity of a color by neutralizing it, which pushes it more towards an earth tone shade. Okay, so where do we see that? We might see it right there, or right here, or a little under the eye, up in here. Okay, so that is how you can work out a Caucasian skin tone. So I have this Asian lady here, and we're going to start out again with my mixture of yellow ochre and let's do a little bit of burnt sienna. Paint those together. Now I'm going to start out with the darkest shade on her face, which I know it's a little bit hard to see, but I'll zoom in the camera as much as I can. So this is a great shadow for middle tone or for dark down there. You can see on her neck. Okay, and I did that with just a little burnt sienna, yellow ochre, and ultramarine blue. Surprisingly, this is almost exactly what you guys used for your plein air palette. So you should by now be very familiar with these colors and how they work together. So to lighten that, let's add a little bit of white and paint those colors together. Okay, check that. I'm looking at her forehead. There's a patch on there that looks just like it. Okay, a little bit off to the side. You can add a little bit of alizarin crimson. Put some nice flesh color in there. Okay, this was the largest Asian lady that I could find. You could find some bigger pictures. I was really happy when I saw this. I really don't have that many magazines, so it might be easier to see it if it was a little bigger. Okay, now this little African boy, I love his skin tone. Look at this, burnt sienna, ultramarine blue. And if you get these in pretty much even amounts by mixing this, that, and that at about the same quality, you get a really nice dark brown. Okay, that might be great for his shadows. He does not, we don't have a lot of shadows showing on this picture. They had actually writing on his face, so I cut his face in half. But look at here, right about in the shadow areas, that's pretty close. You can lighten it by adding a little bit more yellow ochre. By adding too much white to a darker color will make it sort of pasty. See, let's see what happens. See how that becomes sort of a pasty, chalky, flat color? So try using something other than white to lighten. So we can add a little bit of yellow ochre to that to just brighten it a little bit, grabbing some sienna. So, oop, that's still really dark. We'll add a little bit of white and see what happens, just a little, to the sienna and ochre mixture. That's getting closer. A little more. Okay. So you can bring that down into the shadow over here, a little bit more sienna and blue, and then over towards the light we have more ochre and white over here. A little more sienna as it goes into the shadow here. But you can paint right on these magazine pictures. Obviously, they're just garbage. And throw them away when you're done. But it's a great way of just not worrying about anything else on your canvas. You're just practicing mixing colors. And you can actually do this. You can go get some leaves outside. You can get some flowers. Just practice mixing the colors that you see on there. Okay, a little bit more yellow ochre down here. I'm seeing it's a little warmer. Okay, and so that, in a nutshell, is how we do different skin tones. You can add, a little bit more variations as you work into some of these darker areas, a little more reds, a little more yellows, and so forth, as you see fit. All right, now we are about to jump in, and I have my painting from what I did last week, and I have this set up. I'm gonna leave the camera right where it is so that you can see everything I'm mixing as I'm painting and my reference, so that it's all right here. And I strongly encourage you, and a couple of things. First of all, for most of you out there, you are brand new at portraiture, and some of you are brand new at painting in general. So my strong recommendation is to, if you are new, follow along step by step as we go along with this painting, because I do believe that it is going to be easiest and best for you to just watch what I do, copy what I do it right on your canvas. And in fact, if you want to at home, which I would even recommend, and I didn't do it, but you could print out her picture and then tape it right next to your painting. So you have everything right here. The further your eyes have to travel from photo to canvas to palette, the further it has to go in between each of these, the longer your brain has a chance to forget. So even that's why I like to hold my palette, because it's right next to my painting. And so that is a preference that I make. I know a lot of people like to set their palettes down on the table next to them, but I prefer this way, especially as you're just learning. And there's all these challenges to overcome. All right, so let's jump in. And what I'm going to do in the beginning here is I'm just going to start out by just adjusting my drawing and seeing where there's a few places. Every time you sit down to paint on your painting, you want to just kind of go over it and see, okay, is it looking good? Are there any things I need to fix? And of course there are, and we really are, seems like we're never 100% satisfied, but we can at least begin a little bit with just touching up some of these areas where I really wanted to make sure that the likeness is coming through. And so I'm going to just mix up a nice inky mixture. This is just to help me draw in a little bit more. Okay, so I'm going to focus on her eyes right now. And if you have other issues that you want to work on, you may either want to pause this and work on those and come back, or just follow along. I feel that her eyes need a little bit of help in just in placement and subtle angles. So I'm going to work on those, because I also feel that if the eyes aren't right, then it just feels like nothing's right. So double checking the angle of this one. I want this one to be kind of the center eye. It's sort of in the center of my whole canvas, and it's closest to us. So I want to make sure this one is right, and from this one I'll measure everything else. So I'm just using a small brush. I might even switch to an even smaller one, but for now this is fine. I notice that her eye on this side kind of droops down a little bit more than what I have it. So let's just get that right in there. And checking where her eyebrow starts in relation to where her eye starts. And I think I need to bring that in just a little. I'm going to do that with just the smallest touch of white, just to remind myself that that eyebrow has to stop there. Okay, and then I think the angle of the eyebrow in relation to the eye is all right. So getting a little bit more of my inky mixture in here. I think I'm content to leave that eye and come over to this one. So now I'm going to hold my brush along the top of this eye over there to see where it touches the other eye. Keeping my arm straight, the top of this eye is in line with that eyebrow. So checking on mine, the top of this eye is in line with that eyebrow, okay. So, but this eye, where does that one hit the other eye? So I'm going to start over there. I'm drawing a line straight across. It cuts that other eye about in half. So if I come over here and I make this one in half, just checking, that one just has to come up a teensy little bit. Sometimes, especially in portraiture, the smallest little millimeter makes a difference. So take your time. There's no hurry. We're not in any race. It doesn't matter if it takes you a month to do this first couple lessons. That's okay. The point here with the Academy is to learn. And however long that takes, that's why we say work at your own pace, because there is no hurry here. And so I'm bringing that up just a little. And oops. The key to making art is a couple of things. Yes, it's enjoyable and we love it, but we also love the challenge of it. And to me, that was a major draw. Even when I was little, it is a big challenge, but that's half the fun. In fact, I almost think that's probably most of the fun. I love the challenge of what we're doing here, and you know, I get bored if it's too easy. So that is where my mindset is. Now I want to compare this eye to this eye, so I'm going to measure how wide this one is, and I'm going to compare it to how tall it is, because I think I have this one bigger than it should be. So I'm sliding my thumb along my brush like this, and I'm putting the tip of my brush on the far edge of her eye, and my thumb represents the inside of her eye. So that is how big that eye is. Okay? Now I'm going to tip my brush vertical and compare that to the other eye. So that eye, my thumb is at the bottom of her eye and the tip of the brush is at her eyebrow. Okay, so these should be about the same size, and that is correct right there. But is it correct over here? Okay, I'm going to bring it in just a little bit because it's just a little bit too out that way. About the width of the line that's saying it's too far. So we're going to pull it in this way. And I just took a little bit of white to shave that down, just to represent that lit part of her face over there. Okay, I already feel that that's looking better. Alright, and then put some of that back in. The white of her eye over there. I'm going to draw in, just use this brush, some of that eye that got lost. All right. Okay, we're on the right track. And I'm looking where this eye, if I look at the corner of this eye, where it tucks in by the nose, I'm just going to pull it in a little tiny bit, about like that. Just a little, just enough so that I know it's there. When I come back through here and I'm putting in more of these details, I'll be able to pull out more of that information of the angles and colors and things. But the trick about portraiture is to be patient with yourself. Be very, very patient. These things take a lifetime to master. And don't expect to get it overnight or even right away. These things take a long time. And I have many days of my own doubting, but it's more of a never a thought that, oh, I just shouldn't do this or I can't do this. But I used to get frustrated that I wasn't further along than I wanted to be. And so my challenge too was to be patient. I wanted to be there so bad, but you know, with that kind of passion, you just keep going. And also, you don't want to compare yourself to other people. Don't ever look, oh, so-and-so is so far. I am guilty of that myself, you know. For a while, I just wasn't even on Facebook. It was a couple years ago. And I you know, every time I went on there, I saw, other artists were just so good. And I just didn't feel like I could be that good. And when am I ever going to feel good about my work? I mean, really good. And I realized one day, it isn't a matter of who's better than whom. It's simply a matter of what did you do yesterday? And are you working on it today? That's all. Remember, we have just as many hours in the day as Rembrandt. So I think her mouth is I think I have the angle too extreme. So I'm going to just pull it down just a little. Remember at the beginning I said all these angles need to be on the same plane? So if I check this angle, I think it's not quite the same. Remember I said just the slightest bit can throw it off. And that's okay. Really, it is, you are always able to adjust things. It does get more tricky as you go along to try to adjust the likeness, so you really want to get it in place before you start adding skin color. Because once you start adding skin color, now at that point then you're working on values and colors, and so we really want to make sure that as much as possible those things are in place. Okay, now what I'm going to do is go through and just double check that these angles and distances are correct. And so I'm just going to use the dark like I've been using to help redraw some of these for a little bit more accuracy. So this passage here down to her cheekbone is about straight, and I do have that straight. And her cheekbone is longer, there's a longer passage in here that comes like this. Okay, and then this, looking at the distance of the edge of her mouth, drawing a line straight up, I'm seeing that it is about at the tip of her nose and about at the corner of her eye. So there's the corner of her eye, tip of her nose, and the mouth needs to come over a little bit more. About right there. So let's erase some of this, dip it in your Terps. Just wipe it off like that. One thing I want you to remember too is it's just a painting. You can scrape it off or throw it away. They make more canvas. But I really do suggest that you hold on to these to really chronicle your first year in the Academy. That way you can look back and see your growth. But no worries, they make more canvases. Portraiture is really, it is a challenge. I'm not going to lie to you. It is difficult. But you know what? If it was easy, everyone would do it. That's what sets those champions apart from those who just quit. It isn't easy, but you're doing it. And every one of you have signed on to the Academy. I'm proud of that. I know professionals who are simply tracing their paintings. They're just projecting them onto their canvas, and they're making money hand over fist, and I think that's terrible. Kudos to each and every one of you who are taking your own education into your hands to really challenge yourself to become better artists. That's all up to you. And I think it's wonderful. I'm comparing this angle to everything that I see going on the inside of the face. So her chin comes around like this, just observing that angle, and then it seems to have kind of a little bit sharper line here as it intersects the neck. The neck has a sharp edge, and then it quickly fades to soft. And that's okay, we'll get to that later. I just want to make sure that that neck, if I drew a line straight up from the edge of that neck, where is it going to hit the rest of her face? So it's right at the inside of her nostril, the outside of her nostril. Okay, so maybe I'll bring her nostril in a little bit this way. A little bit of white will help, just to help me remember that that's where that goes. Now I'm going to define her jaw over here a little bit. So let's look at where that comes. It starts, if I draw a line from the corner of her jaw where it hits her ear, straight across, corner of that ear is right at the base of her nose. Base of her nose is there. Her earlobe should be there. So I had it about 1/4 inch too low. Okay, like that. And then I also want to measure the width from where her hair starts here to the edge of her nose. And I want to compare it to a vertical measurement because I feel that maybe that's too wide. So I'm going to come over here and my thumb is on her hairline. The tip of my brush is on the edge of her nose. So there's that measurement. Turning my brush vertical. Bottom of her chin, it cuts her nose in almost in half. So over here, cutting her nose almost in half. Now the edge of her nose to her hairline. Okay, well I guess that is right. Once I get these values on and darken, it'll start to sculpt out the appearance of her face and the likeness a little better. It can be difficult before you get the values really in place to be sure you have a likeness, because if you don't get the dark where it's dark and the light where it's light, it'll be difficult to see, because those values really do sculpt out the form a lot for us. Okay, so I am content that I am on the right track with my likeness, and I'm going to just put this dark in there real quick like that. Okay. So we are going to rush headlong into skin tone. So, grabbing, just like I said at the beginning, I'm going to clean this palette off. Grabbing a little bit of white, a little bit of yellow ochre. Now, into this, I'll paint those two colors together. Okay, I'm going to work, the first area I'm going to work on is around her eyes. So I'm grabbing a little bit of alizarin and I'm going to paint these together, just like this, till I get a color that I see as a darker color inside the passage near her eyes, in and around her eyes. And I see that right in there. Just put it where you see it. I see some down here. And you're going to be pushing and pulling and fiddling around with these the whole time. So you lay it down, assess it, see, oh, okay, I see that color here. Where else do I see it? Maybe as it comes up that way? I see a little bit of it on her nose. It's like I spy this color. And I kind of see it on the rim of her nose here too. And a little up here in her forehead. And I'm squinting down at the photo there to try to simplify these value passages. Okay, so that's fine for that right now. Let's add a little bit more white to that mixture, and I want to get some of these lighter tones. So a little bit of the yellow ochre and alizarin crimson. I'll twirl my brush to get some of the extra paint off. Pieces of color. Look at where the color changes and just lay that down. See it up here? That's a little bright for that passage, so let's put it where I see it, on the edge of the nose. I don't want to get lazy and just use it everywhere, because it really isn't. It shifts. There's little subtleties. But when I squint, it'll simplify it, and I can lay it down in clean pieces of paint. So I see it up here under her eye. Oh, and this is a size 4 filbert. You can use a flat too. Flats are good. I just happen to have this one. You can see it's just little pieces of paint. And I think that this will eventually need to be hit a little brighter, but for now, this is a great value. Dipping into this mixture that's a little tiny bit darker up here on her forehead, the light is not hitting quite as intense. So I'm gonna just keep it really simple. Let's get a little bit of that more as we come down to the eyebrow. See this beautiful lit passage. It's so lovely on her face. Now I'm thinking about topography and the way that the light is hitting. And I use my brush stroke to help identify that. Just looking at all these places where I see this bright light, and I'll add value changes into that later, or subtleties. Down here where her mouth turns, the light's hitting it pretty bright right here. I think I want this a little brighter because it comes out at us a little more. A little bit more white. And I see that over on this edge too, a little bit more white. We'll hit these values while we're thinking about it. Okay, back to what we were doing. Her chin has the bright passage on it right here. I'm going to grab a little bit more of that alizarin right here as I paint in some of this on her chin. But you can see so far I've just used 3 colors. Okay, I see a little bit of that right here. And see how just by adding these few value passages that her face starts to take on a little bit more sculpturalness. Okay, now I'm going to get some of these more middle tones that I see in here. Oops, you know what? Grabbing a little bit of this alizarin right here. Just want to paint a little bit of her cheek. And here I'm thinking again about the way that that cheek turns this way. And I wanted that in there before I got to the middle tones because there's a middle tone value right here that I want to see a little better. All right, so let's grab a little more alizarin and ochre, yellow ochre. And I'm going to now add just a touch of, I'm going to make a pile over here of ultramarine blue and burnt sienna. So I want these two together over here so that I can dip into this to get a little bit more neutral shadow tone. See how that takes a nice, cool, almost hot chocolate color? Okay, so we're going to use that in some of the shadows. I might even just mix it into that ochre right there. That's better. And then there's a very subtle where her cheek meets the muzzle area there. And then on this side, I'm squinting down at her face, assessing. See, I have the values pretty much laid out on here, so I'm trying not to stray from those very much. Middle of her forehead up here, that is not that dark. So you can see I'm just adding a little bit more white to that soft chalky gray mixture. That's better. Right straight across here because this is where the plane is flat on the forehead. Just a nice, I want you to think in simple sculptural terms there. I'll blend that right into that passage where I have that piece that I put down. Getting some more of that. I'm going to grab a little bit of linseed oil, put off to the side, use a little bit. Get more of that brown, mix it in with my softer skin. Okay, where else do I see that? The side of her nose is very dark. And then right here, yeah, it's not as dark yet. And then I see it also down here a little bit. And under here. And in between her nose, right there. And I see some up under her eye right here. Under her eye. It's much darker under her eye than I have, so I'll have to paint that a little darker when I get there. Okay. I see it down over here. Yeah, a little darker. In these first stages, we're just simply laying down the simple blocking in the values and colors. Looking down here on her neck, I see a little that same color with just a little bit more yellow ochre. So since I have it here, let's just get that too. So that comes like this. I see it here as a transition. And then coming around like this, where the clavicle goes back that way. Okay. All right. Now you can see I'm leaving gaps because those are different colors. So it's okay to leave them. Forehead up here. And when I said that you can make adjustments as you're going along, I saw that her forehead had a little bit more different shape to it than what I had, so I wanted to get that in there a little bit more accurate. You can always do that as you're going along. Taking some of this blue-brown mixture, coming up here to the hairline because I want that softer. Alright, so I have more of this blue-brown mixture. I'm going to put, there's still white on my brush. I think I'll grab a little bit of the white and that alizarin ochre mixture. But I'm going to paint this into the shadow areas now. If I squint down, the temple right here turns, that's too dark. It turns right here, so we want this to be in an important place in the skull. Right at that turning plane, right there. Oops. Come back here with this color, just to identify that passage there. Squinting down, trying to get these values in here, right? And I know that this is a little bit, this will end up being darker, but I do want to put something down right there. Okay. I'm going to need some more burnt sienna in that. Nice sienna and blue, dark color here on the side of the nose. Getting that nice and dark the way it should be will also give you the likeness. Let me see that over here too. Next week we're going to do a side step at the beginning. Just like I did skin color today, we're going to talk about painting eyes and mouths. So I'm not going to do those today, but we'll do an in-depth look at those next week. Right. A little bit lighter here as we bring this nose down and around to the front. Make this a little darker over there. And then I want this dark shadow right in here. Looking at the brush strokes and the way that they show the form, I can keep this really quiet and subdued over here. I want a little more blue in there because it really has a very soft transition from the hair to the cheek. Okay, as we come down around to the light, I see more alizarin and ochre. I didn't even clean my brush, just going right into that with a little bit more white, because under this jawline here, I'm seeing a little bit more warmth and light. And then a little more alizarin and ochre as I paint the front of her chin here. There's a lot more blood in the chin and the front of the nose, and so we want to paint those a little bit more redder, which is good too because they're coming out at us. So I'm just looking at, this is a little bit more yellow ochre and alizarin. I'm bringing that. Like I said too, you can always adjust things as you go along. It doesn't have to be perfect in every stage. I want a little bit more alizarin at the edge of her nose up here as it turns and goes under this way. And there's more shadow under her eyelid right there. A little more alizarin right here. This whole passage here on the side of the nose, that whole sinus cavity where it comes down. Just watch how the flesh comes up to it. And we'll get a little bit more of this brighter highlight right here because I've kind of been painting it out. And let's grab some of that Cad Red now. And I want to get some of that rosiness in her cheeks, so we'll add a little bit more alizarin into that. And this is just the rosy that is in the bright, a little bit more lit part of that there. Put some down here. And up in your nose. So I'm just kind of picking out the places where I see a subtle bit of reddish. I don't want to overdo it, but I think that kind of works in there. Let's make that a little bit brighter white in the middle. Just a little bit, not real bright. So far I've just gone around the mouth and the eyes. I really haven't done much there at all. We'll get into all that next week. I think it's okay to leave them too. We won't be messing up too much by just leaving them. We'll work in layers on this painting. Layers and layers, and that's okay. Just what I'm doing here is I'm just kind of softening that value back there. It was just a little too dark. And if you make those too dark, it can age the person. And so you don't want to make them too dark. Unless that's your objective. So I just picked up a little bit brighter white in here. And I want to hit these values a little bit brighter so that they dry a little darker. So when we come back to it next week, they'll feel a little bit more accurate. So I'm just taking some of this nice clean, it's not totally white because I have some of these colors on my brush, the skin tones, whatever. All right, and get some of these up here too. And on the nose. And right here, a little brighter right there. At this stage, you really kind of want it looking like a photo that's out of focus. It's kind of fuzzy. Okay, and we'll put a little down here. I'm going to take just yellow ochre and white. I do have some of that rosy still on my brush, and that's okay. But just that little bit of yellow ochre with less of the blood in it will separate the neck from the front of the face. And I want that a little softer there. A little oil. White tends to be just a little bit stiffer than the other colors. All right. So I'm just going to soften this. Just because I don't want it to dry really hard over the week. And get a little bit of shadow on the neck, and then we're going to wrap this one up for today, or this week. And that is burnt sienna, ultramarine blue, yellow ochre, and the little bit of white that was on my brush will give this a little bit of air back in here. Get a little more sienna. That's yellow ochre, alizarin, and white. And I'm just going to bring this up into her neck a little bit more because I felt that there was more of this color value down here than the dark. Alright, now I'm going to soften this sharp highlight there where the nose does its thing. I just don't want it to dry really hard. Okay. All right, and that is going to wrap up this next stage of the painting. I think that's a great stopping place. We don't need to do anything else with her hair. That'll be for another lesson. And we will conclude that. All right, so that wraps up our second lesson in our portraiture. We'll work more on this next week. Okay, thanks so much, guys. Bye-bye.